And into that mix, you throw a style of advocacy. What's happened is the public policy advocates picked up what's called zealous advocacy from the practice of law. They imported it into public policy, and these now are the norms that define what's appropriate public policy advocacy. Card stacking, caricature, evidence selecting, all of those things that are appropriate, considered appropriate for a criminal defense lawyer, and to some extent for the prosecutor. Those have been picked up and ported over. That's now the standard conventional style of good public policy advocacy. You combine the growth and advocacy coalitions, where people are talking mainly to those who agree with each other, a tendency for them to develop negative attitudes toward the other, an approved style of advocacy by highly paid professionals, which borders on lying, but is definitely built around distortion and the animation of fear and anger and hatred for the other side. You have the public policy we have today. And what's interesting is I see a lot of talk about litigious lawyers, a lot of talk about adversarial lawyers in court, and I see virtually no self-awareness that these techniques, when used in the public, actually have worse consequences than in a courtroom. Because in a courtroom, at the end of the day, you can all go home and say, I was just doing that for show. I was just doing it because it was my job. Not in public policy. I'm doing it because I'm me. And because you're you. So we've made progress in the law, inside the courtroom, oddly enough, in challenging the norm, the conventions of zealous advocacy. I don't think we've even started challenging the norms of zealous advocacy on the outside in the world of public policy. Because if you're good, you show up nasty on CNN. And your people who send you money and complain about polarization to their friends and teach their children how important mediation is, cheer and send you money. That's where we are. I teach a class called Non-Litigation Strategies for Social and Political Change. And so it's for law students. And what I'm trying to make them aware of is that when they become practicing lawyers, they're frequently going to run into public policy problems. They're going to have clients who have trouble with agencies. They're going to have clients who have trouble with other private clients, but they're both trying to influence or lobby Congress or some agency. They're going to be on boards of directors. They're going to be members of organizations. They may start organizations to try to win some cause or another. Lawyers are deeply involved as citizens, as advocates, as leaders. Every one of them will have an opportunity to do that, whether they choose to or not. And we're not teaching our students how to do that. That's what the course is about. One of the things I've observed by watching advocates in the course of my professional career is that oftentimes we don't stop to ask ourselves, what does success look like? In a way, we're like the lawyer who comes in as a client and says, okay, let's go sue the bastards. We are, as advocates in the world outside of litigation, often reflexively going on the attack and employing an attack strategy without pausing to say, the client comes in and or the group we're working with and says, we're mad about illegal immigrants crossing the border, or we're mad because illegal immigrants or undocumented workers are being deported, whichever it is. And we immediately say, well, let's put a stop to that. And so we immediately employ a strategy of attacking the group that says the opposite of that, without pausing to ask ourselves or the groups we're working for, oh, wait a minute, just a second here. What is it that we want? What is it that's important to us? And who are we? How do we want to do this that's in a way consistent with our identity of who we are? And what are the relationships we want to have with the other stakeholders in this situation tomorrow, the next day, and the next day? Are we here for one time, or is this a long time effort? I don't think that current day lawyers and current day policy advocates, even the ones who are paid to do it, often don't stop and ask themselves, oh, wait a minute here, what is it we're trying to accomplish? Will the solution, the policy solution we're pushing for right now, will it really solve the problem in a way that it advances our needs and interests? Are our needs and interests really 100% opposed to that of the group we're contending with, or is there an overlap? If there's an overlap, what about trying to generate some progress that might be win-win or compromise, not always reflexively going for win-lose? So the same questions that a practitioner working in private law needs to ask: what are the goals? What does success look like? What are the different ways that we could generate benefits and have a higher ratio of benefits to costs for the client? Those exact same questions need to be asked by those of us who are involved in policy advocacy. We need to learn, I think, two fundamental skills, or habits, I would say. The first habit is to play the movie forward. If I do this, what will they do in response? If I do nothing, how is the movie going to play out? If I intervene in this way or that way, what are they likely to do? How do I respond? You know, it's basic strategy 101 for a lawyer. It needs to be brought into public policy to play the movie forward. Second thing we need to do is to learn the importance of looking at a situation from the perspective of the other groups with whom we're contending. Now that's a trick, always. I think it's more difficult in advocacy in public policy than in private lawyering. When you're being a lawyer for a private client, your job is to advance the interests of your client, but it's also your job to maintain a boundary between your ego and the identity of the client. That's part of the profession of being a lawyer. So to look at a dispute from the perspective of the other party is actually part of the skill of being a lawyer, so that you can understand how they're likely to respond to various initiatives and how the matter might be resolved. In advocacy on public policy, it's different. Typically, when the lawyer's working on an advocacy issue, they're working as an employee, as a member, maybe as a contractor, but they have been selected in part because the employer believes they share the values. In fact, they're expected to blur the boundary between their ego and their identity and the identity of the cause or the organization for which they're working. That's how they get chosen. It's not because they're just effective lobbyists. They're chosen because they share the values. They're expected to. So it's much harder to put it another way. It's one thing for a lawyer to adopt a perspective of the other party. It's another thing for the client to adopt a perspective of the other party. To expect the client in a real tough conflict to adopt a perspective of the other party, that's asking a lot. That's why we do mediation and all sorts of stuff, right? Well, in policy advocacy, these students, if they're going to grow up to be effective advocates, they need to learn when they're involved as an advocate, you still need to learn to look at a situation from the perspective of the other. Now, part of the reason you want to do that is so you can anticipate what they're likely to do to develop a good scenario. But of course, as we know from those of us involved in collaborative law, problem-solving law, various kinds, anytime you look at a situation from the perspective of someone else, it's likely to change us. It's likely to change the way we see it. And it's the enemy of either or, black and white, polarized thinking. And so it's very risky business for a passionate advocate to bring herself to really look at an issue and try to see it from the perspective of the other. But here's my test. Until you can come to believe that a decent human being could hold the position that the other side is holding, you haven't finished the job.